We're always kind of the butt end of the joke. The war on men, quote unquote, has obviously escalated in the last few years. Most of the war against masculinity is a proxy war against Christianity as well. Christianity is what made men great. It's what made them moral. I don't recall seeing a ton of positive portrayals of like strong, emotionally healthy and involved fathers and husbands. There is a toxic side to masculinity. It's when you drink, watch porn, and ignore your children. Why does every sitcom for decades portray the dad as dumb and useless? You're aware of this, right? Where did the modern epidemic of daddy issues originate from? And how the heck can we get it under control? What if regaining masculinity started in the home rather than looking externally to macro cultural change? What if everything's in the home? Dr. Professor Nancy Pearcey, my dear friend, one of my favorite authors, best-selling author of Love Thy Body, Total Truth, The Toxic War on Masculinity, joins me today to discuss when the cultural shift happened that restructured the role that fathers play in the home. It's a fascinating history. Unless you've read this book, you probably aren't even aware of the history behind what is now the war on toxic masculinity. Not many know the catastrophic impacts of, let's say, the Industrial Revolution and how that directly birthed the feminist movement. That's right, there's a direct relationship. We are going to unpack how the beginnings of feminism were realized because of the absence of a father and husband in the household. You're going to love this conversation. One of my favorites, with one of my favorite people. Give us a rating and review to help us reach more people. Okay, hey guys, did you know YouTube just like deleted my channel for a few, out of nowhere? They said because we were posting nudity. What? Okay, and then they had to reinstate it because they said you didn't violate any rules. I've told you they're coming. I know that we don't have like the biggest reach, but God's been faithful to this show and to the White Rose Resistance and the impact and the messages we get every day. It's a big enough target, apparently, where I have a regular viewer at Right Wing Watch who watches every episode. My channel was gone for 2 days, and luckily we got it back. We need your help, okay? Hit subscribe, hit the notification bell on YouTube. Go subscribe at Rumble in case that digital assassination is one day permanent. And if you're on Spotify or iTunes podcasts, hit that 5 stars. Tell me what you think about the show, okay? Even if it's a recommendation. I love reading those. It helps more people see the show. And at the White Rose Resistance, we are 3 years old. We're growing quickly. We're launching resistance chapters around the country. We do media to change hearts and minds and push back against lies, but then we mobilize the local church to be great again against evil. If that matters to you, we do need your help. Go to thewhiterose.life and become an ally. At $35 a month, you get your battle box in the mail, and you join our app, the White Rose Resistance app, where there's courses, curriculum, live calls, communities. It's very cool. There's master classes, pro-life apologetics, activism training. You can talk to our team. It's super cool. Or join at $70 a month at Air Support, and you join our Book in the Barracks book club, where we read books together, talk about them live. I want to hang out with you live on Zoom. And there's so much more that we provide to you as the solution in your homes, your families, your communities, your city, to push back against the evil that we see destroying the American family so quickly. We need your help. Let's get into it. This is the Seth Gruber Show. Dr. Pearcey, welcome back to the show. Our favorite apologist, worldview thinker. You're such a blessing to the church. Thanks for taking time to talk to me today.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's always good to talk with you.
Thank you. Well, it was such a joy to have you in the last film I made, the 1916 Project. We're working on another one that we're going to extend an invite to you to be a part of as well. And you were such a blessing at our DC conference earlier this year, Life or Death Con. Just such a joy. Your mind, your intellect, your experience. Your newer book, I've been rereading whole sections of, and I really want to tell people to go buy it. It's called The Toxic War on Masculinity, How Christianity Reconciles the Sexes. We talk a lot about masculinity at the White Rose Resistance because we believe actually men should be leading the charge against baby killing and protecting the family. And that's not the MO of the Evangelifish Church in 2025. And so this book was such a blessing to me and our team. But why did you write it? And I've heard that you got a lot of heat for this book. Is that true?
It was the most controversial book I have written, and I just did not expect that. I really thought my earlier book would be, because it, Love Thy Body dealt with abortion, euthanasia, homosexuality, transgenderism, all of these cutting edge issues. But in the Christian world, it turned out that masculinity is more of a trigger word than any of those others. It was jumped on first by a group of women who are egalitarian Christians because they thought it was too favorable to men. And that was quite a that was a Twitter storm. I got jumped on for 6 weeks on Twitter by this group of women. And then when that finally died down, I did get jumped on somewhat by sort of the manosphere Christians, sort of men who didn't think I was strong enough in promoting complementarianism. And the irony is, I say point blank in the book that I'm not even dealing with complementarian versus egalitarian, because as you said, I'm an apologist. I want to answer the secular world. The secular world is not asking that question. That's a tiny in-house debate. So I looked at social science data on Christian men and answering the charges that we get from the secular world, the secular media, which tends to be, Christian men are exhibit A of toxic masculinity. And that's a charge I wanted to equip people to be able to answer.
Well, white Christian men in particular, right? We're like the scum of the earth, the dog poop on your bottom of your shoe, like that. We are the culture and the media's favorite target.
Yes, and the reason you asked me why I wrote it, the reason I wrote it is because I was running into those kinds of charges. I think the turning point came when I read an article in the Washington Post, a respected mainstream publication, and the title was, "Why Can't We Hate Men?" I thought, really? And the subtitle is, "We have a right to hate you. You have done us wrong." And then the Huffington Post editor tweeted #KillAllMen, and then said it was a joke. And speaking of jokes, you can buy T-shirts that say "So many men, so little ammunition."
Jeez,
and titles of books that are very, very blunt, like "I Hate Men" and "No Good Men" and "Are Men Necessary?" That last one was by a New York Times columnist. So you know what's really tragic, though, is that some men are also picking up that progressive line. As a male book author who wrote, "Talking about healthy masculinity is like talking about healthy cancer." And then this one you may have seen because it was in the news. The director of the movie Avatar, James Cameron, said, "Testosterone is a toxin that you have to work out of your system." So this is what I wanted to respond to. I wanted to say, where is this coming from? How do we understand, you have to understand where it came from and how it developed, and how can Christians get better equipped to answer these kinds of charges? And to support men, especially our own men, how can we do that better?
So listen, I mean, I think that the war on men, quote unquote, has obviously escalated in the last few years. I think that's obvious to anyone. But even growing up, I'm 34. I remember seeing most movies, most cartoons, most sitcoms, most reality television shows, you name it. I don't recall seeing a ton of positive portrayals of like strong, emotionally healthy and involved fathers and husbands. We're always kind of the butt end of the joke. I mean, any portrayal of a father or a husband is usually a negative one. But you kind of trace a lot of the history of masculinity, particularly in the West, and kind of what led us to this point where men are just an acceptable, bashing object. It's such a beautiful history. It's such a wonderful treatment culturally, historically, philosophically, religiously. Where does your mind start? If I just ask you, how did we get here? Like, what are the origins of the war? on masculinity in men. Where would you guide us, Dr. Pearcey?
Let me say first that I have a lot of sympathy for people who grew up with this, like yourself. There was a psychotherapist who writes regularly for the Wall Street Journal, and she said the young men coming into my practice today, especially the young men, are coming in demoralized and depressed and demotivated because they do feel like they're growing up in an environment that's hostile to masculinity. So, the older generation didn't experience it as much. The younger generation has. But you're right, even when we were young, the father in particular was always the butt of the joke. And the history of that goes much further back than most people realize. I mean, I started out, most people do, thinking, well, maybe second wave feminism, 1960s is when this happened. And when I started researching this book, I found out it goes much further back. You find this kind of hostility back in the 19th century. And a lot of it happened because of the Industrial Revolution. Because before that, men worked alongside their wives and children all day on the family farm, the family business, the family industry. And so the social expectation on men focused much more on their caretaking role, on their responsibility for those who they loved and who were dependent on them. And it was really the Industrial Revolution, when it took work out of the home into factories and offices, that men had to follow their work out of the home. And for the first time, men were not working with people that they loved and had a moral bond with, their family members. They were working as individuals in competition with other men. Now, that's a very different social environment. And that's when you see the literature start to change. People start to protest that men were losing that caretaking ethos, that they were becoming egotistical, self-interested, greedy and acquisitive, using the language of the day.
Wow.
And even turning their career into an idol. I was surprised how many times that language was used in the 19th century, that, that men's primary loyalty is no longer to family and faith and church, but their primary loyalty is now becoming, to self-advancement, to achievement, to professional advancement in their career. So, and then the fathers especially, it's especially fathers that get jumped on in the media, in cartoons, in animations. We all know it from Family Guy and
The Simpsons.
Yeah. Fathers in particular got jumped on because for the first time, they weren't with their children all day. And so they did not know their children as well. They didn't know their needs, their thoughts, the family dynamics. They'd come home at night, and not know what happened all day. And so already in the 19th century, you see people treating this as traumatic. The loss of the father in the home. I have quotes in the book that say things like, the mainstay, the central figure of our home is gone all day. Technically they were in the home, unlike today where a lot of fathers, are out of the home altogether. Sure. But it was still a shock that they were gone for most of the day, coming home only on the nights. One woman, she's the head of the president of the Women's Christian Temperance Movement, who many historians say was the most influential woman of the 19th century. Wow. And here's how she put it. She said, the father is the prototype of the divine, of God the Father. And yet the prototype of the divine is gone from the house, from Sunday to Sunday. They didn't have Saturdays off yet. So the prototype of the divine is no longer in the home. And so that was treated as, she called father absence the most important issue of our day. In the 19th century, long before most of us realized it. So I think we have to kind of use our historical imagination and realize fathers being out of the home was huge, especially for sons, by the way, of course, because girls still had their mothers at home, so they had a day-in, day-out model of what it means to be a woman. But boys no longer had a day-in, day-out model of what it meant to be a man. And so one historian puts it this way, for the first time, boys experienced an identity crisis. One historian calls it industrial fatherlessness.
Wow.
It was a kind of fatherlessness. The father was gone all day. He was invisible. That's how another sociologist put it. The father was invisible all day. And so the boy's primary connection with the adult male world was shattered.
Wow.
And so all of these things that we're dealing with today
Fascinating.
started much earlier. And of course, that does also tell us some of the solutions. If the problem was fathers getting disconnected from their sons, the long-term solution is reconnecting fathers with their sons.
Yeah, that's good. It's isn't it crazy to just think about? We take that for granted today, that a father leaves the house at 8:30 a.m. or 8 a.m. and he's back at 5, maybe 6 p.m. I mean, we just take that for granted. That's like, that's just the water we've swam in for so long. But the reality is that that's like relatively new. We're talking less than 200. Industrial Revolution is what, like 1790s to through the first half of the 19th century.
Yeah.
It's like, that's less than 200 years. And we just take that for granted now. That was a seismic shift in how families were organized, and therefore how society flowed from that. Your tracing of that was just phenomenal.
Exactly. For millennia of human history, fathers have been the mainstay of the home. And so it made a lot more sense that mothers and children, were dependent on the father, that the emotional relationship was also much stronger back then. You had an economic connection as well as an emotional connection. I mean, today, you expected to come home and relate about what? Relate about nothing. You had nothing in common throughout the day. But the pandemic did make a difference. There were a lot of men who discovered they actually liked working from home. And the Harvard University actually did a study. This is not in the book because it's more recent, but right. Harvard did a study. And the conclusion of the study was this. During the pandemic, 68% of fathers said they got closer to their children, and they don't want to lose that.
Wow.
I thought, there you go. Even Harvard University is showing that.
Wow.
And I have lots of anecdotes in the book, too. One of my favorite examples is one of my graduate students was married to an IT professional who came home during the pandemic. So I interviewed him, and he said, our life is so much more balanced now. Because I'm home, first of all, it was seamless, moving home because technology, like you and I, we can talk over Zoom like this. But he said, because I was home, I decided I would be the one to make lunch for the family. Because I was home, I could help with the homeschooling. I could take the kids to soccer practice and choir practice.
Wow.
And then he said, I'm never going back to a cubicle.
Wow.
But he said, my favorite part was, he said, the time I used to spend commuting, I now spend praying with my wife every morning.
Wow.
So I have
That's
lots
cool.
of anecdotes in the book about men who did find ways. They had to be creative. They had to forge a path because it's not just automatic anymore. But they had to forge a path, and they found that they all felt like being closer to their family was definitely worth it.
So I read a great quote by a pastor historian one time. It went something like, most of the fight or warring against Western civilization is a proxy war against Christianity. And I obviously, because Western civilization is a byproduct of Christianity, but I also feel similar about this topic in debate, Dr. Pearcey. I feel like most of the war against masculinity by the feminazis, to quote Rush Limbaugh, by the radical leftists, the feminist, whatever, is a proxy war against Christianity as well. Because Christianity is what made men great. It's what made them moral. It's what tempered their, the toxic side. I mean, there is a toxic side to masculinity. It's when you drink, watch porn, and ignore your children. There is a toxic side to femininity. It's called second and third wave, and you might even say first wave feminism. I mean, sure, we all have a toxic side we can go to, but that's been used to broad brush men, all men, as toxic, when most of the fight against those masculine aspects or attributes are things that in their right order are actually beautiful and necessary for safeguarding civilization. And so this gets into the whole debate between the left and the feminist war against men that really spans all of the 20th century, certainly before that. There seems to be seedlings of that with Mary Wollstonecraft and others. Do you have thoughts on that?
Well, yes. One of the things that again, you asked me why I wrote the book. Another reason is that I ran into, this was sort of by chance, I ran into the sociological literature on Christian men. And I was blown away. The social science data on Christian men is so positive, and it counters the secular narrative. You know, the secular narrative is, if you hold to any notion of male headship in the home, that will turn you into an overbearing, tyrannical,
chauvinist,
oppressive patriarch. Well, you know, actually, that's an empirical claim. So the social scientists were saying, well, where's your evidence? You're making these charges, but where's your data? And so the good thing about Christian men being targeted is they went out and did the studies. And in my book, I quote about a dozen different studies. And they all found that Christian men actually test out as the most loving and engaged husbands and fathers. Let me break it down, some of the stats. So first of all, their wives report the highest level of happiness. And yes, they do interview the wives separately. I always get asked that. Most of these studies are large public databases. So yeah, they're not small Christian studies that might be, biased. Christian fathers spend more time with their children, 3.5 hours more per week than secular men. Christian couples divorce at a much slower rate than secular couples, 35% fewer divorces than secular men. And then they actually test out as having the lowest rate of domestic abuse and violence of any group in America. Sometimes a quote can really encapsulate it. So let me give you one. The largest study was done by Brad Wilcox at the University of Virginia. And to give you a sense of his stature, he gets published in the New York Times. So this is a New York Times article where he said, direct quote, "It turns out that the happiest of all wives in America are religious conservatives. Fully 73% of women who hold conservative gender values and attend church regularly with their husbands have high-quality marriages." And then he turns to his fellow sociologist. I don't know if you know, but sociology is a very secular discipline. And he says, academics need to cast aside their prejudices against Christians and against evangelicals in particular, because they do, in fact, test out as the most loving and engaged husbands and fathers. And so this is not, pep talk from some religious leader. This is solid empirical research. This is data that we should be confident about bringing both into the public square and into our churches. It's not in the churches yet. That's another reason I wanted to write the book, is because if you look at my endnotes, they are all academic journal articles. None of this has been popularized yet. And so we really needed to bring it into the church as well, to encourage men who are doing well, who feel the attack from the culture. Oh, I forgot to give you one of my quotes on evangelical men. I had quite a list, but I'll give you just one.
Yeah.
One in particular was by the co-founder of the Church Too movement, which followed the Me Too movement. And she said, "The theology of male headship feeds the rape culture that we see permeating American Christianity today."
Whoa.
So this is what our Christian men are feeling. They're feeling attacked as well. And so I would really like this data to get into the churches to encourage the men that, when they follow God's design, they do, in fact, have better marriages and happier families.
There's so much more to say, but first we want to thank our sponsor of the Seth Gruber Show, Every Life Diaper Company. Listen, I'm just going to keep saying this because I think that if millions of Christians, who, by the way, are outbreeding the left and having all of the babies, we're the only ones above replacement rate, I think. Well, except the Muslims, but that's a conversation for another time. If we just all stopped purchasing child baby needs from left-wing woke pro-abortion companies, we could start bankrupting woke corporatism, and that would be a great win for the American family. If you are having babies, if your loved ones are having babies, if you're a grandma or grandpa and you want to give something to your kids or grandkids, the nursery at your church, for goodness sake, should not be buying from Coterie or Huggies, who all support abortion. That's right. Did you know every major American diaper company supports abortion in some way, shape, or form? What? How could the people who who profit when more babies are born help subsidize and financially or rhetorically support the killing of their clientele base? I don't know. Make it make sense. You have to fight back with your wallet. We as American Christians need to actually treat our money as a way to fight for righteousness. Get your diapers, baby wipes, and now shampoos and body washes, non-toxic, baby, from Every Life Diaper Company. Go to everylife.com, use promo code Seth10, that's Seth10, Seth10, to get 10% off your first order. That lets them know that we sent you, and so they can see, hey, the Seth Gruber Show listeners, they're actually making a difference for life and growing their business. Yes, we want to help grow businesses that support babies and not killing them. Go to everylife.com, promo code Seth10. Thank you, Every Life, for being a sponsor of the Seth Gruber Show. Why do you think, Dr. Pearcey, that so many pastors, particularly in the evangelical church, don't address a lot of the masculine issues, or if they do, they address them very poorly? I feel like most of what you see coming from the evangelical church, and of course, we don't know about those faithful, sweet, small little country churches that have more common sense than anyone with 2 or 3 PhDs. But by and large, what you see coming from the evangelical institutions of publication and research and your top authors and podcasters, no one deals with this issue. And if they do, it's done very poorly. It's as if the evangelical church just follows whatever the new cultural, norms are and talking points about these things. Why do you think that is?
I was just going to say that because they follow the cultural talking points. The first pushback I always get is, but haven't we all heard that Christians divorce at the same rate as the rest of the culture?
I've heard that for years.
I actually ran into a stat saying that is the most widely quoted statistic by Christian leaders.
Wow.
So, they're trying to motivate us negatively, apparently, because the social scientists went back to the data and they made a very important distinction. They distinguished men, evangelical men who are authentic and committed and attend church regularly from nominal Christians. And these are men who on a survey like this might check the Baptist box, for example, but who in fact attend church rarely, if at all. And we have a lot of nominals in America, because we have a stronger religious heritage. And nominals test out dramatically different. They actually fit all the negative toxic stereotypes. Their wives report the lowest level of happiness. They spend the least amount of time with their kids. They have the highest rate of divorce, 20% higher than secular couples.
No way.
And then the real shocker is they have the highest rate of domestic abuse and violence of any group in America. The same sociologist, Brad Wilcox, that I quoted earlier, wrote an article for Christianity Today. And the line that I took out of the article was, the most violent husbands in America are evangelical Christian men who are nominal Christians.
Whoa.
So this is what the church is up against. It's not, it's not just the secular world, but I think even Christians, are the public perception of evangelicals is often shaped by the nominals, right?
Yeah.
By nominal Christians. By the way, I only ran into one study that gave the actual numbers. You and I hang out mostly with very committed Christians, and so I thought nominals might be a small group. No, they're about the same size. Numerically, it's about the same. So about half of the Christian men, the men out there who are identifying as Christian or as evangelical, about half of them are actually nominal. And so I think we need to tell our young women this in particular. If they're dating, they need to figure out whether this is, committed Christian or a nominal Christian. And it does present a discipleship challenge. How can we, on the one hand, encourage the men who are doing well, and then reach out to these nominals who they're hanging around the Christian world enough to pick up the language of headship and submission, but then they infuse those words with meaning from the secular script for masculinity.
Right, and that's why you always hear the horrible stories of some guy who attends this so-and-so church who's been beating his wife or drove his daughter to get an abortion or is an alcoholic. It's like, well, that's not a committed Christian man under accountability. You know what I mean?
No, they end up with the worst. Some people ask me, why do they end up worse than secular men? Well, apparently, if a secular guy is hitting his wife and kids, he feels no religious justification. But the nominal Christian does. He'll say, well, she's supposed to be submissive, and she wouldn't, so I had to put her in her place.
Yikes.
Oh, well, I start the book with my own story because I was raised in a very abusive home. My dad was one of those nominals.
Really?
In books on abuse, they often ask, was it open hand or closed fist? And it was closed fist. He was punching us. His favorite was the knuckle fist. That's where the middle finger sticks out to cause a sharper stab of pain. So this was my background was, and he would justify it biblically too. He would cite Bible verses at us, why we needed to submit and obey and to abuse. So I do have by the way, I do have 2 chapters in the book on abuse. The last 2 chapters for people who are in this kind of a situation, I found the best books in the Christian world on abuse. So if you need resources on this subject, the last 2 chapters of the book, I had to deal with it. Since nominal Christians, they're out there. If I didn't answer that question, it would look like I was, pushing it under the carpet. So I had to deal with abuse in Christian homes at the end of the book. So there's some excellent resources there for people who might be in that situation.
Well, I found that, beginning of your story very compelling and emotional, because I could see someone, particularly those who hate you, criticizing and discounting this book by saying, well, what they call women who are pro-life, you're a traitor to your own gender. I could see you getting the same kind of attacks, like, well, you were just raised in the evangelical world. This is all you've known. You don't really know about toxic masculinity. But your story is pretty heavy, pretty gnarly about what you were raised with which, frankly, in God's providence, makes your voice and your testimony and your case that much more compelling throughout the book. So
I was interviewed by a Christian psychologist who said, at least we know you're not writing from an ivory tower. You're writing from the trenches. And it's true. As a young adult, I ricocheted off into extreme feminism. I read all the foundational feminist books, and I thought
Tell
they
us
were
about
wonderful.
that. Tell me about that. What did you read?
Well, Betty Friedan, for starters, Simone de Beauvoir, of course, Kate Millett. I loved Kate Millett. Susan Brown Miller. All the Nancy Friday.
Did you read that weirdo Shula Smith Firestone?
Not the whole thing. No, I mean
she was wild.
I read excerpts of her material. In fact, I quote her in the book. But she was the one who said, women should not be allowed to work from home. To be mothers and homemakers. Why? Because too many women would choose it. So therefore, we cannot allow them to. I think that was Simone de Beauvoir in her debate, actually, with Betty Friedan on that topic. But yeah, Firestone was a total protege, mentoree of Simone de Beauvoir. And I wanted to get your take on this because I feel like it fits into what we're talking about today, Dr. Pearcey. In her 1970 book, The Dialectic of Sex, Firestone, absolutely insane, but makes perfect sense if you understand feminist ideology. She said, just as the end goal of socialist revolution was not only the elimination of economic class privilege, but of the economic class distinction itself, so too the end goal of feminist revolution must be, unlike that of the first feminist movement, not just the elimination of male privilege, but of the sex distinction itself. Genital differences between human beings would no longer matter culturally. She continues and she says that the end goal of this is that the tyranny of the biological family would be broken. She regarded pregnancy and childbearing as oppressive. The biology itself was inherently oppressive. But again, Seth, so much of this is the Industrial Revolution. Before the Industrial Revolution, women worked alongside their husbands in the family farm, the family industry. Women had an economic contribution. They were considered economically indispensable. When work was taken out of the home, women's work was taken out of the home too. From candle making to carding wool, to weaving, to making your own clothes, to canning food. All of these interesting and creative kinds of work.
Because it gets all industrialized. Yeah.
And women were left with early child care and cleaning the house. I mean, there's a reason for the feminist movement. That's what we need to pay attention to, I think, as well.
Wow.
The women lost a lot with the Industrial Revolution. And it's natural that they should want to once again regain an economic role in the family. And frankly, most women do. I was shocked when I read an article in Red Book magazine, and I don't know if you know it because it's for women, but it said something like 65% of women who are home do, in fact, find ways to have an economic contribution, even by creating a home-based business or doing some sort of remote work. Most women today actually do, in fact, find ways to contribute financially, and to have that sense of indispensability. That contributes a lot to your sense of worth. If you know that your family can't get along without you, that they can't just hire someone to do the services that you do.
Yeah.
And also just the inherent satisfaction of fulfilling your gifts and talents.
Yeah.
So I think that to counter feminism, we can't just say, you guys are wrong. We have to say, where did feminism come from? It came out of the Industrial Revolution as well. And Dorothy Sayers has a wonderful quote where she says, what's happened to all of these sort of home manufacturing that was done before the Industrial Revolution? It's all been taken out of the home where it's being done by men. She says, even the simple dairymaid with her bonnet has been replaced by a male mechanic with a milking machine. And then she said, it's not enough to she said, conservatives tend to just tell women to be quiet and go home. That's not enough. We have to address the fact that they've lost that sense of worth and contribution that they used to have. She has a whole essay called Why Work, where she says, all of us are made to work. I mean, this is the Garden of Eden. This is the cultural mandate. We were all meant to work. Women, too. Cultural mandate wasn't just for men. It was for both men and women. And so that's what we need. My years of being a feminist at least left me with the understanding that we can't just try to suppress it. We have to answer those needs, the loss that women experienced with the Industrial Revolution.
This is so good, Dr. Pearcey. This is so great for people to hear. Because as someone who runs in conservative circles, who speaks at conservative events, etc., what you're saying is I can testify, guys, from the road and from all these circles I've been in. What she's saying is exactly true. There's a tendency in sort of red pilling conservative movement, or obviously you've got sort of your liberal conservatives, you know who I'm talking about. They're like, they're MAGA and they call themselves conservatives, but then they're like, we need gay surrogacy. And you're like, well, I don't think you're conservative, but you know what I mean. The true conservatives, and then the very right-wing Christians, who many times are total culture warriors for the unborn. And we do a lot with those folks. But there is a tendency in those circles to kind of just say, the man should be out there providing and the woman should be at home with the kids. It's wrong to flip those orders. And by the way, I pretty much agree with that. Like, I don't think the woman should be going out and making all the money from 9 to 6. And I agree with that ordering. But there is sort of a discounting of the, I guess, profit side. I don't know that what you're saying, that a woman should also be making things and having if not a career, something that she helps to provide financially. And to totally discount that is not helpful. And I think it probably gives a great way to discount feminism is by understanding where it's coming from. And I'd never heard that full take on it before. What do you take? What's your thoughts on this, Dr. Pearcey? That Mary Wollstonecraft, who's called the first feminist, that's what she's called, does all of her writing, and her impact today is happening during and right after the French Revolution, which is 1790s, which is when the Industrial Revolution begins. Is that a coinkydink?
Yeah, that's an interesting insight. Yes. What surprised me is that when you read historians, we've all been trained by the feminists to think that women used to be oppressed and downtrodden, and had no rights. But if you read the historians, they say actually women had, one quote is, a rough equality. They had a rough equality with men because they were just as economically indispensable as men were. And
Right.
even if they didn't have certain legal rights, they knew that the family depended on them as much as on the husband and father. And so they
Yeah.
had a sense of self-worth and a sense of equality that they actually lost. Again, it's part of seeing that the Industrial Revolution represented a lot. Most people think, oh, but it was wonderful for women, right? The labor-saving devices. Yeah, but the labor-saving devices also left them with just very simple. It's like factory worker. The factory worker is left with very simple, repetitive tasks and no creativity, no responsibility. Well, it left the household with only very simple, repetitive tasks, unless you intentionally decide to change that. And that's what some people are doing today, right? I mean, first of all, homeschoolers, right? They're bringing education back. That's a big one. If you bring education back, and then many homeschoolers are also trying to bring back family businesses because they want to be the ones who, like before the Industrial Revolution, it was the parents who introduced their children to the world of work and to the skills that they needed for work. And homeschooling families, a lot of them are trying to recover that. They're trying to, in a sense, bring back the, sociologists call it the loss of family functions. The Industrial Revolution represented the loss of the whole host of family functions, from education to household manufacture to worship together. Now we just send them off to youth group, to taking care of older people and the sick. All of the things that used to be centered in the home got taken out in the Industrial Revolution. And so we need actually a much richer picture of recreating the home, bringing back the family functions. And that will make both men and women happier in the home.
Yeah. Dr. Pearcey, where does Darwinism become a part of understanding all of this? You talk about, you actually quite eloquently and beautifully, as I think all of your writing is, how the Darwinian theory of evolution normalized many of the traits we see in men today that the culture called toxic. Again, like Darwin, I mean, a lot of this is happening in this same time frame, right on the heels of the final stages of the Industrial Revolution. Does that play a part here, and how do we understand that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that. I always like to get Darwin in here because many people think that was just about science, right? But the social Darwinist immediately began applying it to concepts of masculinity. And let me get a quote. So social Darwinists said, in the struggle for survival, the men who came out on top were ruthless, brutal, savage, barbarian, and predatory. So instead of urging men to live up to the image of God in them, they said to be truly masculine is to reach down to what they called the beast within.
Oh, gosh.
And Darwin himself, by the way, some people say, well, it wasn't Darwin, it was just the social Darwinist, but he also argued explicitly that women were intellectually inferior to men.
Yeah.
And then what would we... Yeah. The feminists are finally figuring out he was not a good guy in intellectual history. But then it's come back. Social Darwinism got discredited, so it's come back under a new label. It's called evolutionary psychology. But let me give you a few examples. This is a best-selling book called The Moral Animal. And it says, I'll read it to you. Human males are by nature oppressive, possessive, flesh-obsessed pigs. Giving them advice on successful marriage is like offering Vikings a free booklet titled How Not to Pillage. And I thought, how can you get away with such a negative view of men? These are the intellectual roots of the Andrew Tate phenomenon. In fact, let me give you one more. This was an older book that was just reissued, Men in Marriage. And the author says, men are by nature violent, sexually predatory, and irresponsible. Their deepest yearning is not for wife and family, but for the motorbike and the open road. The male group escape to a primal mode of predatory and immediate gratification. And I thought, that's supposed to be a book defending men, by the way, by George Gilder. And this is the secular script. I go through several stages of how the secular script got increasingly negative. And the impact of Darwinism was one of those one of the most important stages. And I think you see it right away with the Andrew Tate phenomenon. That seemed to come out of nowhere. But actually, the intellectuals have been preparing the way for decades. And here's the sort of where the rubber hits the road. I got an email from a former graduate student of mine who now teaches high school. And she said, all of my male students are fans of Andrew Tate. They're even using Andrew Tate quotes in the yearbook. I said, where do you teach? She said, at a classical Christian school.
Yikes.
So that's why it's important. Young men need to have a critical grid so that they recognize the secular script, and don't just absorb it. If we're not giving them a healthy, positive, biblical view of masculinity, they are going to absorb the secular script.
Is that just an innate thing? Because listen, I've had people I know, be like, oh yeah, I know, Seth, some of the stuff about Andrew Tate, but I really like him. And I'm like, dude, the guy literally is a pimp. He makes jokes about having a PhD, pimp and hose degree, and runs a whole, digital brothel of OnlyFans stars who he treats like animals. What is there to respect here? I'm sorry, I don't understand this. But is it really just that simple to understanding this phenomenon? Is it that is it just nature abhors a vacuum, and that men will they will exercise dominion for wickedness or for righteousness? And so if you're not presenting a biblical, godly, righteous view of empowered masculinity, then something dark will just take its place. Is it really just as simple as that?
Well, it is true that most of them are not being drawn in because he calls himself a pimp. They're being drawn in because he says, work out, get buff, eat right, eat healthy. They're looking at the few positive things that he does.
Right.
And you're right, though. It's a vacuum. Part of it is the Christian church in the Victorian age began to teach a sort of softened version of Jesus. Jesus meek and mild, look on me, a little child. That was a prayer at the time. We are partly in the after effects of the Victorian age, where Christianity was, in a sense, softened and feminized, and many Christian leaders have been standing against it. You might remember in the book, I deal with a movement that was called muscular Christianity.
Yeah,
and I love that. Yes.
Yeah.
So it was like the late 19th, early 20th century. And I thought it was wonderful that under muscular Christianity was what started the YMCA, by the way, the Young Men's Christian Association. Right. And, which said that a lot of young men are coming to the cities and they're prone to falling into temptation in the city, there's drinking and there's brothels and there's prostitution. And so let's start an organization where they can stay. And you know what they call themselves? The YMCA called themselves a man factory because they were trying to build up strong Christian men. And they had devotional times and prayer times and worship times when they first started. And muscular Christianity also caused churches to start building, athletic events for men, which is more common now, but it wasn't done back then. That was new. They started basketball. Well, it was a Christian pastor who invented basketball. Did you know that?
Wow,
a Christian
that's
pastor.
Awesome.
He wanted something that men could do in winter when they had to be indoors, and he took two baskets that had been used for collecting peaches, and he stuck them up and invented basketball. But that's when churches started having sports leagues and athletic leagues and so on, because they said, we need to. The Industrial Revolution has brought these men out of the fields where they were strong and healthy and physically active, and they're sitting behind desks all day, and they need a way to build their masculinity again. And so the church has actually been dealing with this since the late 19th century. And I think that we should bring back muscular Christianity. I think that would be a good movement.
Isn't the YMCA, Dr. Pearcey, a great analogy, by the way, or archetype for the phrase nature abhors a vacuum? Because now, today, across the country, you're getting stories of YMCAs who allow dudes into the girls' locker room. That's happening at YMCAs across the country, and then you learn the heritage and origin of the YMCA, and you go, wow, okay, that's shocking.
Yeah, well, it's symptomatic of so many institutions that go secular. I teach at a university, so I think especially of all the universities that were started by Christians, Harvard, Yale, Dartmouth, all of these universities started by Christians, and then over time became more and more secular until today. You'd never know that they had Duke is another one. You'd never know they had Christian roots.
Seminaries,
and it all started when they took the theology department and separated it off into a separate seminary. You see, it used to be part of the university because theological knowledge was genuine knowledge. But when they decided, no, it wasn't. Theology was, personal preference and feelings and emotions and experience. That's not really knowledge. So that was what was indicated when they started putting Harvard Divinity School, Yale Divinity School. They started separating off theology because that was no longer considered objective knowledge anymore. So yes, it's part of this very tragic saga of how our institutions have become secularized.
Right. Whereas the ancients would have viewed philosophy as the handmaiden of theology. And now there's just a total split. Let's see. I know we have to go here soon because of time, Dr. Pearcey, but I wanted to unpack just a little bit more of Darwin's impact on this whole conversation. Herbert Spencer, the myth of progress, Rousseau, social contract theory, changing how society viewed the individual, the shift from the family to the individual. I just said a lot of things, but they're all kind of one thing. Help us unpack that more.
Yeah, I really love talking about social contract theory because I think it drives a lot of the social disintegration that we're seeing today. And I have a longer section, by the way, in my other book, Total Truth, if somebody wants to pursue it further. But
Wonderful.
Social contract theory was essentially, when Europe became modern and they said, we need a new political philosophy, we can no longer rely on Christianity. We need a new political philosophy. And so they essentially had a fake Christian view. They said, instead of the Garden of Eden, let's say civil society started out in a state of nature, obviously, a counterpart to the Garden of Eden. But the difference was that in the state of nature, we are all intrinsically disconnected, autonomous, independent individuals.
The noble savage.
Yes, the noble savage. That's where it came from. And where do the relationships come from then? Well, they're created by choice. Whereas in the Garden of Eden, God creates the first couple in relationship. So relationship is just as intrinsic to who we are as our individuality is.
That's good.
But the secular view was, no, it's the individual that's primary. And over time, naturally, people began to feel like, well, in that case, relationships kind of get in the way. Well, I shouldn't say over time. Already with Rousseau, Rousseau said, since we are intrinsically autonomous individuals, relationships like family and church and civil society and workplace, these are all oppressive.
Wow.
They prevent us from being able to be our authentic selves. And it started as a political philosophy, but it soon became, part of how Americans in particular, how Americans view all of our social institutions, including marriage and family. I think a lot of the reason a marriage and family is so fragile today is social contract theory, because it says, what matters is, are you fulfilled as an individual? And if you're not, I'm out of here. Right? It's okay to break the social contract. It's not a covenant. It's just a contract. And so if it's not giving you what you want, you can break the contract. There's today you have moral legal obligations. You cannot break a business contract as easily as you can break a marriage contract.
Yeah.
It's the lowest on the totem pole in terms of any sort of social any sort of social pressure or social sense of obligation, because
Yep.
we're not just autonomous individuals. We are affected by our surrounding society. And so the social attitudes can easily infect us. So I'm glad you brought up social contract theory because, and who do we mean, by the way? It's Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau.
Yeah.
Most liberals are Rousseauians. They follow Rousseau's version. Most conservatives are Lockeans. They follow Locke's version. And so despite the minor differences, both conservatives and liberals today are social contract theorists.
Yeah.
So that's why, the biblical view is the only alternative really today.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, my mentor, Dr. George Grant, made the point that we're all Rousseauians at heart. We have no idea how much we've imbibed. To use our terminology today, Dr. Pearcey, how much we've imbibed social contract theory in the church. We breathe it, we function off of it, we filter our decisions through it. It's the God of me, myself, and I. It's just the secular Trinity, and that is so foreign, not just to the history of the church, which should be kind of a duh, but that's foreign to the American tradition. And so maybe as we land the plane, Dr. Pearcey, can you talk about how that perspective, the older perspective, okay, that you're born into a tribe, a family, you couldn't pick your parents, you didn't wipe your own butt, and so you have duties and obligations to those who came before you. Can you talk about how understanding that helps us understand why so many women opposed suffrage? I find that fascinating.
Yes, yeah. Although I would say in America we're mostly Lockean. Now, liberals are Rousseau. I have to tell you, I run into a lot of Christians who defend Locke because he did have a lot of Christian. He kind of had an amalgamation of Enlightenment thought and Christian thought, and so he gets away with appearing to be more Christian. And so a lot of conservatives are Lockeans, but it's the same thing. It's the same social contract. It's still the assumption that we are at heart inherently, autonomous, independent individuals. And basically, social contract theory starts out it's very unrealistic because it essentially says society starts out as a roughly 21-year-old male. and critics have said the people who founded social contract theory are men who forgot they were children. They forgot they were childhood.
That's good.
Or as one wit put it, in social contract theory, we can decide our own future and our own destiny, except that we can't climb out of our cribs yet.
yeah, that's good.
The alternative to social contract theory is, yes, we are born deeply embedded in social groups, from our family to the church, society, village, neighborhood, community, nation. We are deeply involved in, and we would never become the independent, autonomous persons that social contract theory talks about if we didn't have all these support people, starting with our parents. They have to raise us to become rational adults. We're not born that way. But I wanted to add one point here on bringing us back to masculinity. Historically, after the Industrial Revolution, there emerged a public-private split, where the public realm began to be occupied by these large public institutions, like the factories, the financial institutions, banks, universities, and of course the state. And people began to argue that these large public institutions should operate by scientific principles, by which they really meant value-free. In other words, don't bring your personal values into the public realm, which we hear today still. And so values were relegated to home and church. Well, what happened is, of course, it was men at that time who were out in the public sphere and getting that secular education. And so men did become secular earlier than women did. And so this is part of the history, too, of the tension between men and women, is that we began to say, oh, well, Christianity, religion is for women and children. Right, and it's up to women to sort of be the moral and spiritual guardians of the home.
Right.
And in the literature of the day, they spoke about men going forth into this secular arena and battling in this economic and political realm, and coming home and being reformed and refined and renewed by their spiritually superior wives. So a lot of the male-female tension arose during that time for two reasons, because men were becoming more secular and because women were then being, in a sense, given the job of being the moral guardians of society. And that's another way to understand feminism. Women got tired of that. They said,
Wow.
we shouldn't be the ones who are responsible for men's behavior. We can't control men. In a lot of cases, you cannot control men. Men are bigger and stronger. And because of testosterone, they're more aggressive, more risk-taking. And so to give women the job of being sort of the moral controllers, being men's conscience, didn't work. And that's another reason feminists began to say, we're not going to do this anymore. That's unfortunate, because when they gave that up, nobody took it. Nobody then was a moral guardian. Women began to say we can be just as raunchy as men. Then there was nobody upholding moral standards in society. But I just wanted to bring that up because historically it's another cause for the tension, between men and women. And why women, even today, are the ones calling out men for quote unquote toxic behavior. They feel it's in their right, in a sense, to admonish men to act better. As one historian put it, women were responsible for controlling men's behavior. And that's not a healthy thing.
Interesting. So how does that sort of contribute to understanding the suffrage debate? And that'll be my last question, because that was fascinating aspect of your book that I really wanted people to understand, that it's not as if the movement that opposed suffrage was being animated by a bunch of chauvinist bigots who just hated women. That's not the history of that conflict. Can you explain a little bit of that?
Yeah, that was so surprising when I started reading the history books. And by the way, one reason that my book has a different take is I read male historians. The feminist movement has created libraries full of books. So the vast majority of books are written from a feminist perspective. I found a handful of books written by male historians. So, of course, that's who I read. I wanted to get their perspective. And that's why I found this information, namely that when the women's vote was first proposed, it was mostly women who were against it. Most women
fascinating, right?
were against women's suffrage. In fact, I have quotes, because people don't find this very credible, I have quotes from some of the leading suffragists who say it is women who are the main barrier to passing women's suffrage. So go there if you want some quotes. I got them there. And it took about 100 years. And here was their argument. Their argument was exactly against social contract theory. Their argument was, we want the family to be seen as an organic unit. And if men and women are both voting separately, then it breaks up the family unit. And so if the man, and they were afraid that it was also reduce men's sense of responsibility. If they voted as individuals, they were no longer voting as a representative of the household, where they felt a moral obligation to take into account the interests of everyone in the household. Which, by the way, was larger than today because it was the extended family. It was anyone who didn't own land, so it included household servants and hired hands and so on. So a man had a sense of being in charge of a small commonwealth, and that gave him a sense of responsibility. And they were the early many people think they're feminists. They were not. Many of the early reformers, 19th century reformers who were women, were. They were arguing that it will reduce men's sense of responsibility. That was their main concern. Now, over time, eventually women did come to support the vote. But you know why? Because it was renamed. I mentioned earlier the head of the Women's Christian Temperance Union.
Right.
She renamed it by calling it the Ballot for Home Protection. And her argument was, so many men are coming home drunk and beating their wives and kids and drinking away the family money. By the way, to show you how widespread this was, here's a discrete fact. In 1830, Americans drank 3 times as much as they do today. So there's a reason there was a temperance movement.
My God.
And there was a reason that she said, women don't have any legal recourse when their husbands are drinking away their family money. And so the vote will give women a chance to have some sort of leverage over their drunken husbands.
Wow.
That's when the vote for women finally won, when it was rephrased as a way to protect women who were being abused and whose husbands were drinking and who needed some kind of legal leverage.
Right.
It's amazing because the feminist argument at the time was, autonomy and individual rights. Most women were not interested in autonomy and individual rights. They were not. They were not persuaded by the feminist arguments. They were persuaded by the ballot for home protection.
Right. That's so fascinating. Oh, well, Dr. Pearcey, we could talk to you for hours. What would be your final charge to American Christian men in 2025 who feel discouraged, depressed, constantly attacked, and fed up?
Do read especially the 2 chapters in The Toxic War on Masculinity that deal with the sociological studies on Christian men. I was blown away when I read these stats, these studies, and it will really encourage you because, again, it's not, your pastor just trying to rev you up emotionally. These are facts. These are solid empirical findings, and it will show you that Christian men actually, when they follow God's design, have happier families, healthier marriages, and they also have. I include also a lot of interviews with Christian couples because I wasn't just interested in hearing a theologian tell me what headship means. I wanted to know, what do Christian men really think, and how are they really living it out? And I had no idea that Christian men would express their understanding of their responsibility in such loving, warm, mutual, respectful terms.
Yeah.
Again, partly because, I grew up in an abusive home. I did not think so many Christians would test out so positively. So it's very encouraging. And it's not out in the public arena yet. It's not out in the churches yet. So it's chapter 2 and 3. Chapter 2 and 3 in the book. Read it and get encouraged. I have found it encouraging. I think you will too.
I agree. Guys, this is a great book to get for like a home group that you're in at your church, a Bible study, a men's group. What if a bunch of women read it in a women's group to be better wives and understand how we got here? This is just such a great book. The Toxic War on Masculinity, How Christianity Reconciles the Sexes by Dr. Nancy Pearcey. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks so much. It's always fun to talk with you.
Amen. Well, guys, do you understand why I said Dr. Nancy Pearcey is such a gift? Go support her by picking up a copy of her book. Why don't you buy a few for some people at your church, okay, or your home group, or your homeschoolers, right? If they're preteen, teenagers, this is an accessible book to read. We love her. She is one of the most brilliant human beings, not just women, human beings in the church that I know today. What a gift to talk to her. Guys, go give us a rating and review. Let us know what you think. Let us know who else you want to have on the show. Until next week, I'm Seth Gruber, and this is The Seth Gruber Show.